The rain came without warning that night, not the polite kind that gives you time to find a jacket, but the furious kind that descends all at once and turns the whole city into a moving blur of headlights and flooded gutters. Elena Whitmore sat in the back seat of the company car, her head resting against the cold glass, her eyes half closed. She was 34 years old and already felt the particular exhaustion of someone who had been running for so long that she had forgotten what standing still felt like. The ink on the merger documents was barely dry, 300 journalists waiting outside the building, a board that expected results by the end of the quarter, an assistant who called every 11 minutes. And now the rain, the dark, and the distant sound of a truck somewhere behind them that was going too fast for weather like this. She did not see the impact coming. Nobody ever does. The truck drifted lanes without a signal, its wet tires failing to find any grip, and the collision was less of a crash than an erasure. One moment the world was a lit highway, and the next it was spinning glass and a terrible silence where sound should have been. The car left the road and came to rest on its side in the shallow drainage ditch at the highway's edge. Steam rising from the engine in slow, ghostly curls. The windshield had splintered into a white web of cracks but had not fully given way. And through it the rain was visible, still falling. Still indifferent to the wreckage it was falling on. The driver's side had taken the worst of it. Elena was on the passenger side, suspended at an angle she could not immediately parse. The seatbelt pulled so tight across her chest that breathing was a conscious effort. One of her shoes was gone. She did not know how. The car had simply swallowed it somewhere in the course of its motion through the dark. Elena was conscious for only a few seconds after it stopped moving, long enough to smell something burning, long enough to feel the sting of the seatbelt across her chest, and long enough to hear the rain still falling, indifferent and steady, as if none of this had happened at all. She did not hear the footsteps. She did not hear the voice at first. What she did feel was hands firm, careful, insistent hands working at the door that had crumpled inward, and then the cold rush of wet air when it finally gave way. Someone was pulling her free. Someone who smelled of motor oil and rain and something warm underneath, like a man who had been working all day and had not yet had time to rest. She felt herself lifted. She felt herself carried. She tried to open her eyes and saw only the briefest impression of a face, dark eyes, deeply tired, the kind of tired that accumulates over years, and not just a single long shift. And then the burning behind the car became a sound, a deep metallic thump as something ignited, and she felt the arms around her quicken their pace, and then she felt nothing at all. She woke in the hospital 3 hours later. White ceiling, the antiseptic smell. Her assistant, Marcus, asleep in the chair beside her with his phone still clutched in his hand like a weapon. The nurse told her she had a mild concussion, bruised ribs, and a deep laceration along her left forearm. She told her she was very lucky. She told her that someone had pulled her from the vehicle before the fuel line caught. Elena asked who. The nurse said they did not know. The paramedics had found her on the grass at the side of the road, placed carefully. Her jacket folded beneath her head like something deliberate, like something done by a person who wanted to leave her comfortable even if he could not stay. A detail like that stays with you. Whoever had done it was gone before they arrived. No name, no witness statement. Just gone, the way people go when they want no part of gratitude. Elena lay there for a long time in the thin hospital light, listening to the rain on the window, and felt something she had not expected. A kind of hollow, urgent need she could not name. Not grief, not fear, something more like the feeling of standing in a room where someone has just left, and the air still holds the shape of them. She had spent the last decade being very good at knowing what she wanted and going directly toward it, and it had served her well in every domain that mattered professionally, and had left her, in all the domains that didn't appear on a balance sheet, strangely unequipped. She did not know how to want something she could not identify. She did not know the word for this specific variety of lack. She would find him. She decided that before she fell asleep again. She did not know how yet, but she would find him. Daniel Reeves had not planned to be a hero. He had not planned most of the things that had defined the last 4 years of his life, not the hospital bills that came after his wife passed, not the second job driving nights so he could keep the apartment, not the particular look on his daughter Lily's face every morning when she made sure the lunchbox he packed for her had enough in it, checking quietly so he would not notice that she was checking. He was 38 years old and he had the hands of a man 10 years older, calloused from the garage where he worked days, marked now with a shallow burn scar along the inside of his right forearm from the night he had reached through the hot doorframe of a stranger's car and pulled her free. His name, had anyone bothered to ask, was unremarkable in the way that good men's names often are. Nobody had asked. He had driven home, cleaned the wound at the kitchen sink with the economy of motion, of someone who has learned that pain is less frightening when you simply do not make a production of it, and gone to bed before midnight because Lily needed to be at school by 7:30 and breakfast had to be made, and the overnight shift at the garage had taken something out of his lower back that only sleep, increasingly, could put back. He had not meant to stay. He never meant to stay anywhere longer than necessary. There was something in him, some deep instinct honed by loss, that kept him always a little bit outside of things close enough to be useful, far enough that leaving would not break anything. He had seen the crash from 3 car lengths back, had pulled over without thinking, had done what needed to be done, and then had gone back to his car and driven home and put a kitchen towel soaked in cold water on his arm and held it there until Lily's nightlight clicked off down the hall. He had not said a word to anyone. He had not called the police or the news or anyone. He had simply done it and let it be done. But the world, it turned out, had other intentions. The crash had been on a monitored stretch of highway. The cameras had caught the blur of him not clearly enough for a face, but clearly enough for the silhouette of a man running toward the car and then away again. And the woman he had pulled from that car was Elena Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Technologies, whose face appeared on business magazine covers and whose company's stock moved markets when she sneezed. By morning, the story was everywhere. And the unnamed man, who had saved her life, was already being called a ghost, a mystery, an angel. All the words people use when they cannot find the real one. The rideshare app matched them 4 days later. It was the kind of coincidence that felt, afterward, too neat to be one, but at the time, it was simply an assignment that appeared on Daniel's screen at 7:40 in the morning. A pickup at the Whitmore Technologies Tower on West 11th, and he had accepted it the way he accepted everything. Without drama, without calculation, just the simple arithmetic of needing the money and the job being there. He recognized her immediately. He did not let her know that he did. Elena sat in the back seat and looked out the window and did not look at him at first. She was on a call, something about quarterly projections, and she spoke in the clipped, efficient way of someone who has learned that brevity is its own form of authority. When the call ended, she glanced at the driver ID on her phone and then at the rearview mirror, and something in his eyes made her pause. She could not have said what it was. She had seen 1,000 pairs of eyes in the back of cars. These ones were tired in a way that felt familiar, though she could not place why. She noticed the way he drove not aggressively, not tentatively, but with a particular steadiness that communicated awareness without performance. He knew where the traffic was thickening before it became visible. He took the longer route to avoid a bottleneck that would not have appeared on any app's calculation for another 4 minutes. These were not things she would normally have noticed. She noticed them. "Long night?" she asked, because she had learned that asking small questions sometimes loosened the world enough to breathe in. He looked at her in the mirror for half a second. "Long enough," he said. And that was all. She found herself requesting him again the next morning. And the morning after that. The app's algorithm, helpfully, kept surfacing him consistent pickup times, consistent ratings, close proximity. She told herself it was convenience. She told herself it was because he drove without unnecessary music and did not make her feel obligated to perform small talk. He was simply there, quiet and reliable. The way the best structures are present enough to support, invisible enough not to interrupt. Meanwhile, the search for the man who had saved her was becoming a small media event. She had posted a statement through her publicist, a reward, no amount specified. Only her genuine desire to thank the person properly. The story ran in 3 major outlets: online, people speculated. Someone said it was a firefighter off duty. Someone else said it was a veteran. A woman in the comments said her husband had seen a man running from the scene with a burned arm, and this detail, the burn, the arm lodged itself in Elena's mind and did not let go. She had begun to understand, in the weeks since the crash, that the event had done something structural to her. She had been a particular kind of person before it, capable, driven, organized, not unkind but not exactly warm either, the kind of person who sends thoughtful birthday messages on the correct day and forgets them immediately after. She had been fine. She had been competent and fine, and occasionally lonely in the impersonal, ambient way of people whose lives are full of everything, except the one thing that cannot be scheduled. And then someone had carried her out of a burning car and set her down gently on the wet grass and disappeared. And she had woken up in a hospital with a need she could not name and had spent every day since trying to name it. Marcus, her assistant, had become obsessed with the search in the way that assistants sometimes adopt their employer's obsessions as their own. Partly out of loyalty and partly out of the need to feel useful, he had compiled a list of 12 men who had been in the vicinity of the crash site that night, cross-referencing traffic app data with nearby parking records. None of them had come forward. He had also, more quietly, begun to feel uneasy about the whole business, a nameless instinct that something about this story was not quite what it appeared. He said nothing to Elena about this. She was not in a mood for caution. She noticed the scar on a Tuesday. She had handed him her coffee to hold for a moment, while she retrieved something from her bag, a thoughtless gesture, the kind you make with someone you have unconsciously stopped thinking of as a stranger, and when she took the cup back, she saw it, the inside of his right forearm. A pale, irregular mark, still slightly pink at the edges. The kind of scar that comes from a heat source, and not a blade. She said nothing. She looked away and out the window, and felt the city moving past, and felt something inside her go very, very still. She did not say anything that morning. She spent the rest of the day saying nothing, which was unusual, because Elena Whitmore was not a woman who held back when she had something to think about. She simply thought about it, alone, at her desk on the 40th floor, while the projections scrolled on the screen in front of her and her tea went cold, and the sun moved across the skyline in a long, slow arc. He had been there. She knew it now, the way you know things that bypass reason and arrive already settled, like weather. The scar was on the wrong arm for a driving injury. It was on the right arm, the reaching arm, the arm that had come through a hot door frame to pull her free. The night she finally confronted him, the rain had started again. He had just dropped her at her building and was about to drive off when she knocked on the passenger window. He lowered it. She stood there in the rain looking at him, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, which was in itself a kind of answer. The street behind her was wet and bright, with reflected headlights, and her hair was already darkening with rain, and she did not appear to notice or to care, which told him something about the quality of her attention right now. She was not thinking about her hair. She was thinking about him, and the fact of it, and the fact that she had not been wrong. "It was you," she said. He did not deny it. He looked at the windshield for a moment, then back at her. "You should go inside," he said. "You're getting wet." "Daniel," she said, because she knew his name by now. She had known it for days, and using it felt like a small act of insistence. A way of making him real when he kept trying to be invisible. "It was you. The arm." "I know." He was quiet for so long she thought he might simply drive away. Then he said, in the flat, careful tone of a man who has measured his words against a cost he cannot afford to be wrong about. Yes. She stood there in the rain. She thought she would feel relief. Instead, she felt the strange, aching fullness of a moment you have rehearsed 100 times, and which, when it arrives, is nothing like the rehearsal. She had imagined this conversation with gratitude at its center, a formal thank you, an acknowledgement, a closing of the account. What she felt instead was nothing like gratitude. It was more like the sensation of finally recognizing a room you have been in before, in a dream, and understanding that the dream was trying to tell you something that your waking mind was too busy to receive. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't need you to know. Why not? He looked at her then directly. No mirror between them, and she saw the exhaustion she had glimpsed in the first seconds of their acquaintance. But behind it, something else, something she did not yet have a name for, something quiet and self-contained and utterly without appetite for anything she might think she owed him. Because, he said, if it had been anyone else in that car, I would have done the same thing. There's nothing for you to repay. She was still standing there in the rain when he rolled the window back up. She let him go. She stood on the sidewalk in the wet and the dark and the city noise and felt something in her chest rearrange itself with a slow, deliberate click, the way a door settles into a frame it has finally found. She met Lily for the first time on an evening in early November, when Daniel had no choice but to bring her along on his last pickup of the night. She was 8 years old and very small, and she sat in the front seat with a purple backpack in her lap and the focused, wary expression of a child who has learned to take stock of adults quickly. She looked at Elena over her shoulder and said, with no preamble whatsoever, "You're the one my dad saved. Lily." His voice was mild but clear. "What? You did?" She turned back to Elena. "He didn't tell me your name. He just said she was pretty. Lily." He said that, though. Elena laughed, a real one, not the polished version she used at press events. It came out before she could shape it, and it sounded, even to her own ears, like something she had not heard from herself in a while. Lily looked pleased. Daniel looked at the rearview mirror with the expression of a man who has learned to accept that his daughter will betray him at every opportunity. With love. That evening became another, and another. Lily had a homework assignment she was struggling with long division, which she approached with the focused fury of someone who considers math a personal insult, and Elena, waiting for a call that did not come, found herself sitting at the small kitchen table in their apartment, walking Lily through it. The apartment was clean and spare, everything in its place, the refrigerator covered in Lily's drawings, and a schedule written in Daniel's handwriting that accounted for every hour of his day. There were 2 chairs at the table. A third had been added only when necessary, and you could see from the slight unevenness in the floor where it usually sat that it had not often been necessary. It was the apartment of a man who had reduced his life to what was required, and had not allowed himself to miss the rest of it, or had learned not to. There was a single plant on the windowsill, a small succulent in a terracotta pot that Lily had painted with nail polish, in what appeared to be her interpretation of a tiger. It was improbable, and vivid, and alive in the window's gray light. Elena found herself thinking about it later, back in her own apartment, which had a professional interior designer and no plants whatsoever, and understanding something she had not previously been able to articulate about the difference between a home and a space that costs a great deal of money. Elena looked at the drawings on the refrigerator, while Lily recited division facts. There was one of a woman with yellow hair and a briefcase, labeled in careful block letters. Mommy. It was old, the edges curled, the colors faded. Beside it, a newer drawing in bolder crayon. A man and a small girl standing in front of a car. And above them in Lily's handwriting, U.S. Elena looked at it for a long moment and said nothing. That night, when Lily was asleep and Daniel walked Elena to the door, she said, "She looks for her mother in women she meets." He was quiet for a moment. "She does," he said. "How long has it been?" 3 years in February. She nodded. She did not say she was sorry. It seemed inadequate, and he did not ask her to. They stood in the doorway for a moment, and the distance between them was the exact amount of distance that accumulates between 2 people who have both been careful for too long, and both of them felt it, and neither of them knew yet what to do with it. The photograph appeared online on a Wednesday. A paparazzi shot, grainy, taken with a long lens from across the street. Elena Whitmore, CEO, stepping out of a building in a neighborhood very far from the one she was usually photographed in. The caption, as these captions always are, was worse than the photograph. Tech mogul's secret life. What is Elena Whitmore doing in the East Side housing blocks? The story spun fast. By evening, it had found a shape. The beautiful and powerful CEO, the handsome working-class driver, the motherless child who had charmed her. It was the kind of story that the internet tells itself to feel something, and it told it with the aggressive tenderness of a crowd that has confused spectacle for empathy. Richard Voss, Whitmore Technologies' vice president of operations, watched the story spread from his office on the 38th floor and allowed himself a private, satisfied moment before picking up his phone. He had been patient. He had been very, very patient. The board was already nervous about the merger's reception, already questioning whether Elena was the right face for the company's next chapter. A distraction, the right kind of distraction, applied at the right moment could shift the calculus enough to open a door he had been standing outside of for 2 years. Richard Voss was not a man who believed in enemies, exactly. He believed in obstacles. And he believed in the removal of obstacles. And he was very good at it. Which is perhaps why no one had thought to look at him yet. He was pleasant in meetings. He sent handwritten notes when people's parents died. He had once given up his parking space to a junior analyst who had injured her ankle. And he had done it graciously. In front of witnesses. These were the small investments he made, regularly. In the appearance of decency, they had paid excellent returns for a long time. He saw no reason they would stop now. He had already set people on Daniel. What they found was ordinary and devastating in equal measure. A man with no savings, a dead wife, a daughter with a recurring respiratory condition that required medication their insurance barely covered, and a debt load from 3 years of hospital bills that he was paying down $60 a month at a time. Nothing criminal, nothing even remotely usable, in a legal sense, but the story it suggested desperate man, wealthy woman, strategic charm was usable in every other sense, and Richard knew exactly which journalist to give it to. The headlines came 2 days later. Driver's debt secrets. Is Elena's mystery man after her money? Daniel saw it at the garage, on someone else's phone, and felt a cold, specific humiliation move through him that he had not felt in years, the particular kind that comes not from your own shame, but from the knowledge that someone has taken your honest life and arranged it to look like dishonesty. He said nothing to his co-workers. He went home that evening and made Lily dinner and helped her with her reading and put her to bed, and then sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time. He stopped accepting Elena's ride requests. He turned off notifications. He began to think about his sister in Portland, who had offered once to let them come stay, who had a spare room and a school nearby that had good ratings and a yard that Lily could run in. He began to think about what it meant to want something you have no right to disrupt. He had pulled her from a burning car. That was a clean thing. What was happening now was not clean, and he did not want to be the reason her name was in the wrong kind of sentence. Elena noticed his absence immediately. She told herself she noticed for practical reasons. She found him through the app's help desk, a polite, professional inquiry about a driver she had lost contact with. The kind of message that was absolutely about business and nothing else. He did not respond. She had Marcus drive her past the garage on Thursday morning. She saw his car in the lot and drove past without stopping, and sat in the back of Marcus's sedan staring at the seat in front of her. He thinks he's protecting you, Marcus said, carefully. I know, she said. And the board meeting is Monday. I know that too. She was not at the board meeting yet. She was still in the part of this that came before the board meeting. The part where something true was trying to happen, and the world was doing what the world always does, which is throw noise at truth until truth reconsiders. But truth, in Elena Whitmore's experience, did not reconsider. It simply waited. She found him at the train station on a Friday night. She had a source, a woman at the garage, who had been watching the two of them with the quiet, accurate intuition of someone who notices things but does not gossip, and who had mentioned, not quite casually, that Daniel had booked 2 seats on the late train to Portland. Elena had come alone, without Marcus, without the company car. She had taken a cab. She had stood at the entrance to the main concourse for a moment, rain starting again outside, and then walked through because there was nothing else to do. She did not reach him in time. She saw him from 30 feet away, his back to her, Lily's hand in his, the purple backpack over Lily's shoulders, the train already loading, and she called his name, and he heard her and stopped. But the stopping was the kind that might still become walking again. and she knew it. Lily turned around first. Lily always turned around first. Elena. She pulled free of Daniel's hand and ran to her without hesitation, the way children run before they have learned what caution costs. And Elena caught her and held her and looked up over Lily's shoulder at Daniel, who was standing very still in the middle of the station, the worst possible place to have a feeling. Which is perhaps why he finally let himself have one. He looked at Elena the way a person looks at a thing they have been trying to convince themselves they do not want, which is to say, he looked at her as if she were a problem he had already tried to solve and could not. She looked back at him without flinching. She had gotten very good at that. The concourse moved around them, the announcements overhead, the rolling of luggage, the particular echo of a high-vaulted public space, and in the middle of it, the three of them were briefly, absurdly still. Then Daniel walked back. He picked up Lily's backpack from where it had slipped off her shoulder. He did not say anything. He did not have to. The not boarding was the sentence. She would not find out until later through her own investigation, conducted with the methodical intensity she usually reserved for market analysis, that the car crash had not been an accident. The details came in pieces. A maintenance record altered on the truck that had swerved into her lane. A payment made through 3 shell accounts to a driver who had since disappeared. A surveillance angle that Richard Voss had not accounted for because it belonged to a shop 2 blocks from the highway that had updated its cameras the week prior. It took Elena's team 11 days to assemble the picture in full, and it was, when assembled, extraordinarily ordinary, in the way of most corporate betrayal, the same jealousy, the same arithmetic of ambition, the same willingness to treat a human life as a variable in a calculation. She had gone through the documents 3 times to make sure she had not made a mistake, because she had always believed in precision, and because she could not quite believe, even knowing what she knew about Richard Voss, that he had been willing to go this far. But the documents did not change. They were very patient, the way evidence always is. Daniel had not known what the license plate he had noticed meant. He had not known he was a witness to something. He had only known it was wrong, the way a person with working instincts knows a thing is wrong before they can explain why. She told him. She sat across from him in the station's small cafe, Lily asleep across 2 chairs beside them, with a borrowed coat over her shoulders, and she told him what she had found, and watched his face as he understood it. He was not a man who showed anger easily, but she saw it move through him then, not at her, not at the situation exactly, but at the specific kind of cruelty that targets good people with ordinary lives, as if their ordinariness makes them vulnerable. Which, of course, it does. That is precisely why it is cruel. He wanted me gone, she said. Before the merger finalized, Daniel said nothing for a moment. Then, you need me to testify. I need you to tell the police what you saw. Yes, I will. She had not expected it to be that simple. She had prepared arguments. She had a folder with documentation in her bag that she had not needed to open. He looked at her with the steady, undemonstrative directness she had come to recognize as the truest version of his character and said, I will. As if there had never been a question, they went back together. They filed the statement. The investigation moved quickly after that. Richard Voss had been careful, but not careful enough, and the thread, once pulled, unraveled everything underneath it. Within a week, the board had the full picture. Within 2 weeks, Richard had resigned. The merger was affirmed. The company's stock, which had dipped in the week of scandal, began to recover with the slow, grudging reliability of something that was always going to be fine. And then Daniel was attacked. It was 2 days before the formal charges were filed, in the parking garage beside the garage where he worked. And whoever Richard had hired to clean things up was not finished cleaning. Daniel saw them in time to raise his arm before the first blow landed, which was the only reason it was not worse. He took a hit to the ribs, another to the shoulder, and then the sound of running footsteps and a car, and then silence. A coworker found him 20 minutes later and called an ambulance. Elena was at the hospital before they had finished the triage forms. She came in through the emergency entrance with her coat still wet from the rain outside, and her face arranged in an expression that her assistant had never seen before, and did not know what to call it. Was not fear, not exactly, and it was not the controlled composure of crisis management. It was the face of someone who has been trying to decide whether they are allowed to want something, and has, in the space of a 20-minute cab ride, finally decided. She told the nurse at the front desk who she was and who she was there for. And when she was shown to his room, she stood in the doorway for a moment before she went in. He looked smaller in a hospital bed. People always do. The bed makes them look provisional, temporary, like something that can be taken from you. She did not like seeing him there. She did not like it very much at all. She sat beside his bed. He was conscious, bruised in the specific way that makes a person look smaller than they are. And when he opened his eyes and saw her, he said, "You didn't have to come." "I know," she said. "Elena, Daniel." She said it the way she had said it in the rain outside her building, all those weeks ago. Not as an interruption. As a fact, the person I've been looking for. For all these months, it was never just someone I owed a thank you to. She paused. She was not, as a rule, someone who said things slowly. But this she said slowly. Because it was the kind of thing that should be said slowly. It was never just a debt. "I think you know that." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I'm a mechanic who drives nights," he said. "And you're tired," she said, "of deciding who I am based on the building I work in." She looked at him. "Lily calls me every afternoon. Did you know that? She calls from your phone, and she asks me to help her with her homework, and I do. And I don't know if you know this, but those are the best 40 minutes of my day." He was quiet. Outside the room, the hospital moved in its ceaseless, muffled way. The intercom, the distant wheels, the low hum of a building that is always somewhere, keeping someone alive. "She asked me once," he said, slowly, "if I thought you'd come to her school play." Elena felt something press against the inside of her chest. "When is it?" "December 12th. "I'll be there." He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. Neither of them looked away. And neither of them felt the need to, because they were past the point where looking away was useful. He reached out his left hand, the good one, the one not wrapped in bandaging, and she took it, and they sat like that while the rain resumed outside, and the city went on being the city, indifferent to the small, enormous thing that was happening in this room. He was released 3 days later. By then, the charges against Richard Voss were public knowledge, and the media's appetite for the story had shifted entirely. The villain was named, the CEO was vindicated, and the mystery man who had saved her, and then had been targeted for it, was no longer a scandal, but a story of a different kind entirely. The kind that people choose to tell around the ones they love because it makes them feel that the world, despite everything, is sometimes fair. Elena had given one statement, and one statement only, to a single journalist she trusted, and in it she had said, "There are people who live their whole lives quietly doing the right thing. The fact that it took a tragedy for me to find one does not reflect poorly on him. It reflects on me, and on how little I was looking." The statement ran everywhere. It was, by some distance, the most human thing anyone had seen her say in public, and it generated more goodwill for Whitmore Technologies than 6 quarters of strong earnings had managed. The board noticed this. The board was, in the end, always going to notice this. Daniel hated this version as much as he had hated the previous one. He was not, he told Elena plainly, interested in being a story. She told him that was all right. The story would run its course, and then people would find something else to be interested in, and they would be left with whatever was real, which seemed, to both of them, sufficient. The thing about going back to a life is that you cannot go back to it unchanged. Daniel returned to the garage. He returned to his evening shifts, though fewer of them now, because Elena had quietly connected him with a legal team that had, over the course of a single week, restructured his debt in a way that made the mathematics of his days less brutal. He had not asked her to do this, and he told her so, firmly, with the specific and dignified discomfort of a man who does not like accepting help. She told him that she was not doing it as a gesture. She was doing it because the hospital bills were the result of his wife's death, which had not been his fault, and because Lily deserved to have a father who slept occasionally. She said this last part, looking at him very directly, in the way she had learned to look at him without softening it, without making it easier than it was, because he respected directness, and because softening it would have been a kind of condescension dressed up as kindness. He understood the difference. He accepted it, he said, in a tone that was gruff and real, and nowhere near as ungrateful as it sounded on the surface. Fine. But I'm paying it back. She said that was between him and the legal team, and had nothing to do with her. He said it had everything to do with her. She said they could disagree about that. They did, amiably, for about 4 minutes in the parking lot of the garage. And then Lily called, because she could not find her other sneaker. And they both answered the phone at the same time, and the argument dissolved, the way all their arguments dissolved, not because anyone had conceded, but because something more immediate had arrived, and both of them, at heart, preferred the immediate. He had no good argument against this. He accepted it. In early December, on a Saturday afternoon, Elena drove herself to the garage. She had been driving more these days, not much, but enough to remember that she liked it, that there was something clarifying about having both hands on something and knowing exactly where you were going. She had also found, in these weeks since the hospital, that the apartment on the east side had become a gravitational center for her evenings in a way her penthouse had never quite managed, despite its unobstructed view and its excellent wine, and its proximity to every restaurant in the city worth eating at. The penthouse was a place where she went to sleep and answer emails. The apartment was a place where Lily showed her drawings, and Daniel made coffee badly, and the three of them sat on a second-hand sofa, watching whatever Lily had decided they were watching, which was usually something animated, and occasionally something that made Daniel fall asleep in 20 minutes, and Lily and Elena exchange a conspiratorial look over his shoulder. Elena had not expected to have a life that contained conspiratorial looks. She found she liked it very much. She parked on the street and walked in and found him under the hood of a pickup truck, the radio on low, the garage smelling of grease and cold air, and the particular smell of work done honestly with your hands. He looked up when he heard her. He was not surprised. He had, in some sense, been expecting her. The way you expect rain when the pressure drops and the clouds have been building all week. He wiped his hands on a cloth, and she stood there in her coat and her good boots and looked at him. And neither of them said anything for a moment, which was no longer unusual and had become, in fact, their most comfortable mode. Then she said, "I don't need you to rescue me anymore." He raised an eyebrow. "Okay. She stopped. She had practiced this. She was not, ordinarily, a woman who practiced things. She wanted to say she was direct by nature and by necessity. And the habit of preparation was for boardrooms, not for this. And yet she had practiced it, sitting in her car in the parking structure of her building at 7 in the morning. Because she wanted to say it right. "I've been looking for you since the night of the crash. Not the you that pulled me out of a car, the you I was sitting behind every morning. The you who makes Lily's lunch with enough in it so she doesn't worry. The you who never asked me for a single thing. Not once. Not even gratitude." She stopped again. He was still watching her. I want to be part of what you're building. You and Lily. Whatever that is. Even if it's just dinner on Thursdays and homework, and the school play on December 12th. I want to be part of that." He looked at her for a long time. The radio played something low and indistinct. The cold air moved through the open garage door. He had the look of a man who has kept a door closed for a very long time and is now, carefully, deliberately, unlocking it. "It's not glamorous," he said. "What we have. I know. She'll want a dog eventually. I'm aware. And she has opinions about everything. That I have noticed, yes." He almost smiled. The almost was enough. He walked toward her, and she stayed where she was, and when he was close enough that the cold air between them had become warm air, he said, "Thursdays then." "Thursdays," she said, "and the school play." "And the school play?" he agreed. "And whatever comes after that." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not in the way of movie moments, but in the small and unmistakable way of someone releasing a held breath. "And whatever comes after that," he said. And that was that. The simplest things always are. Lily picked the restaurant, a diner 6 blocks from the apartment that had laminated menus and good milkshakes and a jukebox that actually worked, and she had been lobbying for it for weeks because she considered diners the highest form of dining and had the conviction of someone who has thought this through thoroughly. She ordered a chocolate shake and pancakes, despite it being dinner time, because she had decided that pancakes were appropriate at all hours, and this was not a position she was willing to negotiate. Elena ordered coffee and the soup. Daniel ordered whatever Lily recommended, because he had learned that this made the experience go smoother. The booth was slightly too small for 3 people, and the vinyl seat had a crack in it that Lily had covered with a sticker of a yellow duck, and the ketchup bottle on the table had been refilled so many times its label was almost entirely gone. And it was, Elena thought, the finest restaurant she had been in years. They sat in the booth by the window, and outside the city moved in its usual way. Lights and umbrellas and people hurrying through the cold, and inside there was the warmth of the diner and the sound of the jukebox and Lily's running commentary on everything she had done that week, which was extensive and detailed and required both of them to pay close attention. She had a friend named Abby who had said something at recess that Lily considered a philosophical error and which she was still processing. She had learned a new word, perpetual, and had been using it in every sentence for 3 days. The succulent on the windowsill, she reported, had produced what appeared to be a small new leaf, which she considered excellent news, and which Daniel had confirmed with the cautious optimism of someone who has lost 1 succulent already and does not want to promise anything. At one point, she paused in the middle of a story about her friend at school and looked at Elena very directly and said, "In the way of children who have decided a thing and see no reason not to say it, I'm going to call you Mom. Is that okay?" The diner noise continued. The jukebox shifted to something slow. Elena looked at her. She felt the words settle over her like something she had not known she was cold without. She looked at Daniel, who was looking at the table with an expression she could not quite read, or rather, could read perfectly, which is why she could not look at it directly. His hands were around his coffee cup. The burn scar was visible on his forearm. Pale and ordinary in the yellow light, the most unremarkable evidence of the most consequential moment of both their lives. "Yeah," she said, to Lily. "That's okay." Outside, the rain had started again, the soft kind, not the ferocious kind, the kind that falls in December when the year is winding down and the city has made its peace with winter. It ran down the diner window, in thin, clear lines, and inside, the light was yellow and warm, and the 3 of them sat together in the particular quiet that falls between people who have been through something and have come out the other side and do not need to say so. There was a car at the curb, Daniel's old one, the one with the dent above the left wheel well, and the rearview mirror he had fixed with electrical tape, and the seat in the back where Elena had sat every morning and looked out the window, and without knowing it, had already begun to feel at home. It sat in the rain and was simply a car, unexceptional, unremarkable. The kind of thing you pass 1,000 times and never notice. But sometimes the most ordinary things are the ones that carried you somewhere you needed to go. On a night when you did not know yet that you were going anywhere. In the rain. In the dark, with someone you had not yet had the sense to recognize as yours. Some debts cannot be repaid. The best ones cannot. They can only be lived forward into one ordinary evening at a time, until the living becomes its own kind of answer. Elena had spent the better part of a year looking for a man who had saved her life, and she had found him sitting 3 feet away every morning, taking the longer route through the city, because he knew where the traffic would be bad before the apps caught up. She had been sitting in the back of the answer the entire time. It was the funniest thing, she thought, or rather, the truest thing, which is often the same thing if you can stand back far enough to see it. Lily finished her milkshake and immediately asked if she could have another. Daniel said no. She asked Elena. Elena said that was a dad question. Lily considered this, recognized it as a united front, and accepted it with the dignified resignation of someone who has encountered a fair outcome and respects it even while finding it inconvenient. She settled back in the booth and looked out at the rain and hummed something quiet to herself. And Daniel's hand found Elena's on the table, and the evening went on the way. Good evenings do without drama, without ceremony, without anyone needing to say what it was. It was, simply, the beginning.